A few weeks ago I made a video showing the urban sketching kit that I packed for my first proper motorhome holiday. Now I'm back, I thought I'd show you how it went and take you to some of the places that I sketched along the way. My first stop was Thetford Forest, just to break up the journey really, and to be honest I wasn't expecting to find anything urban to sketch in the middle of a forest, but then I stumbled across something that I thought was worth getting my sketchbook out for. I used a paint first approach, but what am I sketching? It's the Desert Rats Museum and Memorial. The Desert Rats was the nickname given to a British Army division that lived and trained here in Thetford Forest before the D-Day landings in 1944. After I'd blocked out a few basic shapes in paint, I started adding some line work with a Sailor Fude de Man and pen filled with platinum carbon water-resistant ink. Drawing bikes I find tricky enough, but when it's just like a dilapidated old burnt out thing like that, it's even harder. So as with this truck, it's a real lesson in just looking at the lines and how they intersect and not thinking it's a bike or whatever. Sketching in public definitely attracts attention, and I think I got more curious looks here than I would have done sitting outside a stately home. But whenever that happens, I just remind myself I'll probably never see these people again and carry on sketching. I probably need to go back and watch my own video about sketching in public. The chain link fence turned out to be quite a handy perspective guide because the horizontal bits naturally fanned out from the vanishing point, just like the guidelines that I quite often draw in pencil. So I could use them to position the Nissen hut roof and the tops of the windows, for example. The Fude nib's really handy for blacking out areas like these windows. It might not be my best sketch or the most exciting subject, but that doesn't matter to me. It christened my brand new sketchbook, it captures what I saw, and every time I look at it I'll remember exactly where I was, which is just as well because I doubt I'll ever come back there again. Here I'm just dropping in some wet on wet to try and convey that rusty look and the discoloration caused by age. I only used paint for the trees. I didn't want any detail as such because they're way in the background, but I did want to try and convey that we're in the middle of a forest. Then I finally used an oil-based pit pencil to mark in the chain link fence. I wanted it to have that prison camp feel, but didn't want the fence to obliterate what's behind it. Maybe not the most picturesque start to my sketchbook, my new sketchbook, but it makes a change from medieval buildings, I suppose. My next stop was Chatsworth Park, home to the magnificent Chatsworth House near Bakewell in Derbyshire. Set within over 100 acres of historic gardens, it's been the filming location for several productions, including Pride and Prejudice. The campsite I stayed on is just the other side of the estate wall, and guests are given a key so they can wander through the grounds whenever they like. Mary Queen of Scots was imprisoned at Chatsworth several times between 1570 and 1584, and this small moated garden called Queen Mary's Bower is believed to be where she was allowed to exercise and take walks for fresh air. We're just on our way to Edensor village because someone who watched one of my last videos when I mentioned what I was packing for this trip mentioned it and said that there's some beautiful houses, and I think there's a tea shop that's appeared on lots of jigsaw puzzles. So thank you to that person for telling me all those places to go, and we're now going to go and explore. This is Edensor. I hope I've pronounced that correctly because it's certainly not how it's spelt. It's a model village with about 150 residents, built around 1840 because, as the popular story goes, the original houses were demolished because they spoilt the view from Chatsworth House. I don't know how true that story is, but what's here now is certainly very pretty and very sketchable. The first thing that caught my eye was this row of cottages opposite the church, so that became my first sketch of the day. With only one day here, it was a case of so much to draw, so little time, so I again decided to paint first, which I find much quicker in summer when the paint dries faster. Maybe not on cold, damp days in winter though, when you're waiting for those first washes to dry before you can draw over them. Although it was a little overcast at times, it was warm and dry, so this worked perfectly. I'm using an Escoda size 12 travel brush and a set of Daniel Smith watercolours that I'd packed into a Winsor & Newton box. I absolutely love Daniel Smith quinacridone gold, and I used it all the way through this trip for the sandstone cottages and other buildings. Once I'd put down a few layers of paint and let them blend together, I started adding the details on top. For the line work I'm using my Sailor Prophet with a 55° Fudo nib, and then I added a few coloured pencils and a black oil based pip pencil. The churchyard I'm sitting in belongs to St Peter's Church, where President John F. Kennedy's sister Kathleen Kennedy is buried. During the Second World War, Kathleen married William Cavendish, heir to Chatsworth. Tragically, he was killed just a few months later after the D-Day landings, and Kathleen herself died in a plane crash in 1948, aged just 28. She's buried here in the Cavendish family plot. So I did do a sketch of the church, although through lack of time I did add the watercolour when I got back to the motorhome rather than on location. Let's see what this acrylic paint's like. I'm being really careful because I don't want great splodges. Oh, that's not too bad. Better than the gel pen. I did another sketch while I was here, this time of the cottages on the other side of the church. This drawing builds up one line at a time, with each new line intersecting one that's already there, and quite a few of you have asked me to make a video explaining this approach in more detail. So I'll hopefully film one very soon and show you exactly how I build these sketches from the first line onwards. My dogs really do like being with me as much as possible, but this was the point when Sydney, the toy poodle, decided he'd had quite enough of sitting in a churchyard and made his feelings very clear. So the watercolour for this sketch had to wait until I was home. Sydney, have you had enough? Are you bored? Okay. Well, that's as far as I got before Sydney Toy Poodle decided that was the end of his patience. So I went off to a tea cottage where I had a snack and the dogs had some doggy ice cream. Hello. There's one thing that can completely derail a sketch before I've even put pen to paper. Sometimes it even puts me off starting altogether and I look for a different subject instead. And from talking to other sketchers, I don't think I'm alone in this. I couldn't come to Chatsworth House without sketching Chatsworth House, but it turned out to be the perfect example of what I'm talking about. It's such a huge building that it can feel a little overwhelming at first, but with buildings like this, I tried to find a simple way to break them down into manageable pieces. I noticed that I could divide the front into 3 main sections. When I roughly measured them with my fingers, each one was almost a square, maybe just a little bit taller than it was wide. And then within each section, the 9 windows divided everything up again into thirds, both vertically and horizontally, a bit like a grid. Spotting the basic shapes and proportions and getting them down either in pencil or even just mentally can make the whole building feel much more manageable. I often go straight in with pen, but this is one of those occasions where I find a few light pencil marks do really help, and they can stop the sketch from going wrong before I've hardly begun. I used the white acrylic paint pen for the window panes. It wasn't really fine enough for the detail, but it's still better than a white gel pen that never works properly. Next stop, and the furthest from home before I began the journey back, was Hebden Bridge in West Yorkshire. The campsite was a pleasant walk along the canal from Hebden Bridge itself in Crag Vale, near this little village here. After a meal at my favourite Greek restaurant, I paid a visit to the lovely craft and canvas art shop. Of course, it would have been rude not to. I'll just show you what I actually bought in the art shop. I bought a Sea White travel journal. I know I just bought a brand new one to bring away with me, but I get through these so quickly because it's my everyday sketching pad. And it was actually cheaper than Amazon, and I prefer to support local shops when I can. I also bought these Derwent in Inktense pencils. I've seen lots of other people using them at that price. Oh, well, I couldn't really say no, could I? And finally, if you watched my video from a couple of weeks ago about what I was packing for this trip, you might remember that I was taking my Daniel Smith Ultimate Mixing set, but decanting it into a Winsor & Newton field box, which has got a handy little water flask and water cup. But there are 15 half pans in the Daniel Smith set and only room for 14 in the Winsor & Newton box, so one of them had to come out, and I chose to take out the Phthalo Green. But then I realised that I do like having a green pre-mixed, so I bought this. It's Sennelier, it's a different make, but it doesn't matter. I really like Sennelier paints, usually. And the pan I've replaced is a Phthalo Blue. I don't seem to like Phthalo colours very much. Will I like this green? Armed with my new supplies, I found a shady spot under a cafe parasol and settled down to sketch St George's Bridge. What I really wanted to capture was the height of the town around it. Yorkshire is very hilly, especially compared to Suffolk, where I'm from, and the houses seem to climb up the hillside in layer after layer. I wanted the sketch to give some sense of those tiny little buildings stacked high above the bridge. This was another sketch that grew one line at a time. I started in one corner and just kept building it, with each new line giving me a reference for the next. Rather than guessing where the bridge should go, before I drew the side wall of the building, I used the windows to help me. I drew the first row, then I looked carefully at the negative space beneath that row to judge where the next row should sit. I then roughly measured the height of the windows I'd already drawn with my fingers, so I could make the next row about the same height and line them up vertically. After again looking at the negative space below that row, I placed a small dot where I thought the line of the bridge should intersect the building on the page, and that gave me a clear point to aim for so that I could confidently draw in the wall. I added a light wash while I was on location, but we were in the middle of a heat wave, yes, even in Yorkshire. In the end, the heat got the better of me, so I headed back to the campsite and found a shady spot under a tree to finish the sketch. That's where I added the final details, including the vivid green window frames, which were the perfect excuse to try out my new Inktense pencils. I thought about sketching this, but it's actually quite overwhelming. I mean, there's just so much to sketch. I think doing it in one sitting just wouldn't really be possible. Hebden Bridge has a really creative feel to it, and while we were wandering around the market, we stumbled across a local artist called Lucy Parker. I absolutely loved her artwork, and after getting chatting, it turned out that she enjoys urban sketching too. We couldn't resist buying a few things, including a tea towel and some fridge magnets and greetings cards. And very kindly, Lucy also gave me a card featuring Crag Vale, where we were staying. So thank you, Lucy, and if you like her style, do have a look at her work. I'll put her details up on screen. Being on holiday in England without any rain was certainly a pleasant change. The downside was that we happened to be in the middle of a heat wave, so I was a little bit limited in how much exploring I could do with 2 dogs to keep cool and out of the sun as much as possible. One advantage of getting up early, though, was having the square almost to myself, and I made the most of the quiet streets with a quick sketch over breakfast. Later in the day, once Gilbert and Sydney were safely back at the campsite with my partner, keeping cool, I headed back into town for a little longer by myself. I found a shady spot under a parasol outside a cafe, and later settled outside a nearby pub to capture a few more views of the square. One last sketch I did while I was here was of the White Lion Hotel. The first time I ever visited Hebden Bridge, that's where I stayed, so it seemed only right to sketch it while I had the chance. I I used a variety of pens for this sketch. I used a grey Tombow for the street lamp, but I also wanted to try and create a sense of depth. So I used a Fude nib for what was right in front of me, then a narrower straight nib for the middle ground, and then a lighter sepia ink for what was in the background. I'm not sure if it really worked or if you could even notice, especially after I'd put some colour wash down, but it was just a bit of a fun experiment really. None of these sketches are particularly dramatic or masterpieces, but that's not really the point for me. Sometimes it's not about finding the most spectacular subject. It's about capturing the places that mean something to you, so that every time you turn the page of your sketchbook, you're reminded of the memories that go with them. Well, I hope you enjoyed coming on this little motorhome trip with me. Thanks for watching and happy sketching.